Yeah, so can people hear me, I assume?
Yep.
So I'm going to continue the theme of everybody having their own code. Yeah, that seems to be the theme of the day. I started this work after I finished my PhD while still at RIT, and got a lot of it done then, and then I just finished some of it up since I moved to Los Alamos. And what we're going to talk about is using this patchwork code that Mark and Scott talked about, but in the context of numerical relativity. So the problems we're interested in are binary black hole accretion, and specifically we're interested in the inspiral to merger phase. So we've done the inspiral phase with HarmNR, which has GRMHD on a background space-time for the matter can't back react that is basically post-Newtonian asymptotically matched to perturbation theory in black holes. And that well models the regime like before 12M or so. And it's significantly cheaper. But we wanted to take the simulations that I've done and for the binary and then pass them to a merger. And that kind of brought us to this question of what code do we use and how do we go about this. So your options are basically the Einstein Toolkit or Illinois GRMHD or something like that, or a brand new code, which means that we would have to write the infrastructure to port the end state here over to this code. Or we could, and we also wanted to use spherical coordinates because we want to preserve angular momentum out here in the circumbinary disk. So the current numerical relativity community, with the exception of some like the stuff Vasily and Thomas work on, do it in Cartesian coordinates. So we thought, well, we have this code patchwork, which is basically an overset mesh code, which allows you to put whatever coordinate topology / mesh or resolution or whatever you want sitting on top of some other mesh. So we could have a spherical coordinate system out here. We could have, in principle, cylindrical coordinates or something like that tracking the black holes, and we would get these great angular momentum preserving properties and respecting the symmetries of the systems. So we had to decide, do we want to pursue putting this code into the Einstein Toolkit, or do we want to put numerical relativity on, basically? Now the question is why do we care so much? As other people have mentioned, you really want spherical coordinates for spherical problems for disks, because otherwise you get artificial accretion and that can contaminate your solution. Plus, if you can exploit symmetries, you do lose out on the crank factor for your time step potentially, but you can significantly reduce the amount of cells you need and therefore run on lower core counts and get your job done for a lot less. So the idea is to use this patchwork code, which is essentially like an overset mesh code. And these types of codes, I guess, are starting to become more popular in astrophysics, but they've been around for a while outside of astrophysics. So if you look at the CFD community, they go back to like the 1990s. So you'll have these jet wings where they put these meshes that don't have anything to do with the original base mesh that they lie on, but you need that resolution to resolve some turbulence or something else in that area. So a couple of examples that we had to choose from to go with an overset type thing, or for our problem, was we could say, well, let's use patchwork, which exists in HARM, and then let's put numerical relativity into HARM, or let's use the Einstein Toolkit, which has like the Llama code, which has out here in the outer disk would be cube spheres, and then you just use Cartesian AMR near the black holes. The problem is HarmNR didn't have numerical relativity, and the Einstein Toolkit with Llama doesn't have MHD, basically. So this is just summarizing what I was just saying. And so HarmNR works in ideal MHD in the 4 metric. It has time-dependent gravity, time-dependent coordinate systems that can handle all of that. The only thing it was missing was basically numerical relativity and coupling patchwork to numerical relativity. and then the Einstein Toolkit was missing either patchwork or, if you want completely generic meshes, or was missing MHD and bond. So to prove a principle that you can use patchwork for numerical relativity, a great place to start is just a second order scalar wave. So I write the equations here because when I coded this up, I was coding this all into HarmNR. So it uses a 4 metric, it doesn't use the 3+1 split. So the equations of motion are a little different. So what we have is, just this is the 4 metric and the connection, and then it's just written out in second order form for any coordinate systems. And over here is just an example of using that warped mesh that Scott was referring to earlier, and then just passing a plane wave through it. So what I've done is there's a Cartesian mesh here with the warps, and those warps go counterclockwise like this. And then additionally, because this is in a completely coordinate invariant form, it's put into a moving reference frame additionally. So the entire reference frame is rotating in the opposite direction. So the point is that this can handle any reference frame, any coordinate system, time-dependent coordinate transformations. It simply doesn't care. It says, as long as you can relate your Cartesian basis to whatever basis you want to evolve in, it's fine. And then when you do that, you get kind of a nasty term that comes over here, and we generated that finite difference stencil with her. So I've been talking about patchwork and how we put this in numerical relativity into patchwork, and what you can, for the purposes of this talk, kind of think of patchwork as is a sophisticated MPI communication system to provide boundary conditions. You have a mesh that lives on top of another mesh, and those meshes need to communicate to each other where the data is coming from. Imagine you had a spherical patch where you have a cutout, and then you have a Cartesian patch on top of that. If you tried to apply outflow boundary conditions, for instance, that would be completely wrong because you could have a fluid element that's moving across that Cartesian patch, and you'll just get the wrong conditions on one side. So what it basically does is it defines these things called local patches and global patches. And a global patch is a patch that the other patches all live on top of. It can be any coordinate system, but the other patches all live on top of it. And what they do is they all communicate in these background Cartesian coordinates, and they relay coordinates back and forth. So global patch will send its coordinates to local patch, and then local patch will be able to tell whether or not it lives on top of it, and then it can tell global patch here that, hey, these cells live under me. Go ahead and figure out what cells need data from me, and then the global patch will send the result back so that local patch knows where to serve that data from, how to interpolate it, where and transform it, and finally send the data back and transform to the basis that you're evolving in. And similarly, local does that to global, but in a backward sense that it doesn't have to worry about finding who lives on top of it, because nobody lives on top of it. So to give a picture as to what I'm talking about, this is I'm sorry, it's probably hard to see the actual grid lines, but this is a spherical patch, like an equatorial slice and a colloidal slice, with a Cartesian grid that lives on top of it, and then the red lines denote where the ghost zones are, basically. There's like a 1-cell offset because of how Python plots, but the various colors mean purple is dead, and you completely ignore it, and poison it, and never use it. And then these various other colors are all zones that are going to receive data, and blue is just a normally updated live zone. So what we had to do for this to get it to work is we had to implement a buffer region of redundantly evolved cells on both patches so that you never interpolate data that was interpolated from elsewhere, and that can keep your nice convergent properties. And I should note that these buffers are arbitrary in size. It's just a parameter compile time, so you can extend this to whatever order method you want. So to confirm that our algorithm works, what we have is we have a 4th order time integration, sixth order Lagrange polynomial interpolant, and a fifth order Price order dissipation, which should give you totally fourth order convergence. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with all this. So what this is this is 2-to-1 mesh refinement and like the coarsest resolution that I ran here. And it's just a plane wave moving across where the patches start at different points, all three of them. This one's stationary, this one translates at some velocity, and this one rotates. And the result is that the errors are comparable on all of them, and they all have the convergence order you expect. So the next question was, since we can do basic 2-to-1, what's pretty much the worst case scenario I could come up with to make reflections as bad as I possibly could? What I came up with is this is a Cartesian patch with a spherical patch that lives over here off-center and a cylindrical patch that lives over here off-center. They're going to rotate in opposite directions at different speeds, and these are analytic boundary conditions that will not allow error to transmit out. And over here is the relative error. So you'll see that the peak is like 3 times 10 minus 4 on this scale. And then these are just included so you can see a reference of where it was originally with respect to itself. And the nice thing about this particular test is you can test while these flags that identify who is receiving data do not change, they're still dynamically calculated, and the coordinates as they pertain to the mesh that they speak to are all still dynamically changing in time. So as far as the algorithm is concerned, this is all still changing. And it's kind of a final test to test the full moving infrastructure. Not that you would ever want to do this for any kind of physical problem, but just because you can. Rather than having a Cartesian global patch, let's have a spherical global patch. A Cartesian box that'll sit on the origin and cover that. And then we'll have a cylindrical patch over here. And then we just have them move in time. So over here is the wave, this is the error, and as you see the error is largest up here where dx is the radius of your respect. And you can watch the coordinates and the locations of what is being identified here for interpolation dynamically changing in time. And the reason why you're seeing more purple here is because you're going closer in and you're going through a spherical patch, so the way the cutout and beta is. So what remains to be done is basically implementing the numerical relativity part of this. So what I tried to do is I tried to write this like I would do numerical relativity, but instead of having numerical relativity, I just slotted in a simpler state vector and easier boundary conditions. So we would need to generate the right-hand sides for the numerical relativity, and then we would probably use like a Jacobi method to allow it to be in whatever frame and coordinates we need. And then we would need to handle the appropriate numerical to implement the boundary conditions. And I'm not sure, but maybe gauge conditions could be an issue. We'll see. And then finally, the question for going this route with HarmNR is how do we conveniently include useful diagnostics in the Einstein Toolkit? No one wants to write their own horizon finder. And in terms of implementation, basically, HarmNR3D uses a 4 metric. The BSSN will be in a 3+1. So we have to write also the infrastructure that does all that translating for us. We'll have to do the 3+1 split of the matter, send that over to the numerical relativity. The numerical relativity will have to reconstruct the 4 metric and the connection and all these things. So currently, finite differences to calculate the connection from a metric because it's all analytic. You can't do that anymore because you don't know what the time levels are in advance. But this is all known analytically, so you just have to code it up. And then the current integration is already coded up as a split order, so you can update the matter at 2nd order and the wave or numerical relativity at 4th order, and communicate only at the half steps, so it's already there. So all we really have to do is just change the function of the calculus to the right-hand side, basically. So just to wrap up, we wanted to use spherical coordinates for numerical relativity. We wanted to exploit symmetries, and if there are moving frames, it's useful to have your mesh move with that because you can minimize dissipation. And we had the choice of either putting patchwork into the Einstein toolkit or putting numerical relativity into HarmNR and using the patchwork that was already there. Ultimately, because I'm familiar with HarmNR, I decided to go that way. And we ended up having to extend patchwork to do new things and make it compatible with higher order integrations. It wasn't, as currently originally coded, compatible with anything other than second order method of lines. And we had to implement the various interpolations and stuff like that. But in proof of principle, it looks like this is promising that you could do numerical relativity, at least in terms of an accuracy standpoint, potentially, with these types of frameworks. And the mesh refinements may not be too bad. The importance here is, with the exception of the 2-to-1 to just get conversions, I made no attention whatsoever to refinement levels. I never used logarithmic coordinates to keep things square. I didn't bother trying to even check what the cell size ratios were between the various meshes. I just wanted to just kind of throw random things at it and see if I could break it. And it seems to do okay.